Reverend Fathers, Deacon, any visitor guests, Mr. and Mrs. LaVore, any other hidden guests, and my dear brothers. So last year, in giving my vocation story, I talked about Joe Rutten and Father Paul Rutten, and it is a great privilege tonight for me to talk about their brother, who didn't quite help get me to seminary, but has helped really form me as a man since being in seminary, Father John Rutten, my current pastor. There's plenty of things I could talk about and that I was praying about what I wanted to share, but there are really three things that stick out to me profoundly about Father John. And the first is his personal relationship with Christ, first and foremost founded on the Eucharist. He's a very gifted man, very effective speaker. I remember his first homily at my parish. People were very engaged, people were very attentive and very moved, but it was not at all focused on him. It was entirely focused on the altar. And he said, I can do all these things for you, I can make you feel good, X, Y, and Z, but if I'm not providing you Christ, I'm not doing my job. And he knows profoundly that that's the key role of the priest. And he's also very attentive to how Christ is working just in his daily life. Through different people, through certain situations, and he's got such a good eye to see how Christ is presenting himself to him daily. And that goes into my next point, his great ability to help others. He just knows the human condition very well. And because he knows how Christ is working in his own life, he can very clearly see how Christ is either working in other people's lives and they don't see it, or how he's trying to, but people have barriers or something, and he's so good at shedding light by asking the right questions. He doesn't tell them exactly how to get there, but he presents something to them, and then they take it, and people leave his office changed. And I know personally it's been true for me. He knows my heart, I think, better than I know my own heart a lot of the times. Specifically, he was reading this book this summer, and there was a quote that really stuck out to him, and he thought, I think this would be helpful for Tony. And so he doesn't just send me the quote. He orders the whole book, gets it in his office, and says, Tony, come pick up this book for you. Go to page 53 and read this line. And one, it was a very helpful, and it still is, the quote itself is just still bearing fruit in my own life. But secondly, little did he know, and little did I know, that book would be one of the biggest spiritual fruits for me this semester so far. And thirdly, he's a very holy and effective and influential priest, but he knows that he's not finished. He knows he's not perfect. And so he's always looking for, ways to be inspired, and always is attentive to how Christ is going to surprise him day in and day out. There's a number of stories I could share about it, but there's one particular that I think really tremendously grasps it. He was in New York City for a conference, and he was walking the streets at night, and he goes past this beggar, and this beggar was reading, and he says, this guy likes to read. I like to read. We have something in common. And then he keeps walking. he just walks right by him, but he keeps thinking about this. He's like, we have something in common. We have something in common. And he gets to the corner, and he can't stop getting this thing out of his head that we have something in common. And so he knows he has to turn around and go talk to this man. And so he goes, starts talking to this man. Eventually, after having a little bit of a conversation, he asks his name. And he says, my name is Maximus. What's your name? And he says, Father John. And the guy just kind of stops for a second. Father John was wearing a coat. It was cold, so he couldn't see the collar. And so he was very surprised when he found that he was a priest. But at that moment, Maximus just started weeping and started pouring his heart out to Father John. So much so that he wanted to go to confession just on the midst of this busy street in New York City. And at that moment, during hearing his confession, Father John was reminded that this material beggar before me reminds me of myself before Christ, myself before God, a beggar for his mercy. There's nothing that I did to put me in this position that Maximus should have been able to be in my position. The difference was circumstances. It wasn't anything lofty that he did. It was just the situations that they were put in. And Father John recognized that and said, I am like you. I am a beggar before God. And so these three aspects really kind of generalize, definitely. They don't quite fully capture his priesthood. But he's been such a witness for me, such a spiritual father for me, and it would be a great honor to be a priest with him someday. Praise be Jesus Christ.